and I was paralyzed. I could not move, and it was terrifying. Then all of a sudden, boom, I could jolt myself awake, and I was like, oh my goodness.
It adequately explains most, if not all, alien abduction stories. You can't wake up, you can't shout out, you can't move, you have this sense of another presence or another being in the room.
This phenomenon, which I've experienced before, of being asleep, presumably in rapid eye movement sleep, and being completely paralyzed, but then waking up and I'm still in paralysis, but I'm not asleep. And this was a long time ago, probably the 10th grade, which for me, I was 15 years old. I'm 48 now. And was at a party that I fell asleep on the couch. And I don't believe in underage drinking, but there's a possibility that I might have been inebriated. I actively dissuade young people from drinking, and many older people from drinking. But I started drinking far too young. But I remember I drank the night before. I got drunk the night before. Again, something I'm not suggesting or proud of. I woke up and I was wide awake. Gosh, I remember this so well. And I was paralyzed. I could not move. And it was terrifying. Then all of a sudden, boom, I could jolt myself awake. And I was like, oh my goodness. And it must have been an invasion of that atonia, that sleep-induced paralysis, into the waking state.
So I can explain this, and this is the perfect prototypical situation when we see this. What you're describing to me is something that many people listening will have experienced, called REM sleep paralysis. And it's not necessarily a problem or a sign of a condition that you need to be worried about, although if it's happening frequently, we can think about that. What normally happens when we wake up out of REM sleep, and REM sleep, as we spoke about in the first episode, dominates the second half of the night, and particularly the last quarter of the night. As you're coming out of REM sleep and waking up out of REM sleep, which, you've got a 50% chance perhaps, because the other state that you're in is stage 2, light non-REM. As you're coming out of REM sleep, you're regaining consciousness to the external world, and then normally in lockstep with that, perfect lockstep, if not a little before, your brain is realizing this and it's releasing you from the paralysis, and we all wake up and we don't even think about it. I just wake up and I lean over, I turn off, the alarm, and I get out of bed. Everything's fine. Every now and again, however, the waking up and consciousness re-engaging occurs. However, the brain does not release you from the REM sleep paralysis. So at that point, it's almost like a locked-in body phenomenon. And it's very frightening because you begin to be aware of your surroundings, but you cannot make any voluntary movements, because I told you that the voluntary skeletal muscle system is impaired by the atonia, the absence of muscle. You're involuntary, you're still breathing and all that, but your eyelids turn out to be part of your voluntary muscle set. So you can't lift up your eyelids. And then normally what happens is that it's associated with a strong sense of often an intruder, it seems to be, if you're doing it sort of in bed by yourself at home. Now, your context was a little different. And it turns out that if you look at these descriptions of sleep paralysis where you can't wake up, you can't shout out, you can't move, you have this sense of another presence or another being in the room, it adequately explains most, if not all, alien abduction stories. Because when was the last time you saw a news article or on the news that someone said, okay, today it was very clear that Jimmy in Wisconsin in the middle of the day was abducted by aliens and everyone saw it. You're at the meeting table and whoosh, what happened? That was Jimmy, he just got whisked off by alien. It doesn't happen that way. It's normally that you're in bed at night. It's the early morning hours just before you're waking up. These aliens came into the room, they injected something into you, they paralyzed you, you couldn't shout, you couldn't move. It's simply REM sleep paralysis. Now, when do we see that? There are ways, and not ways, because these are not protocols that we advise. There are circumstances where the probability of that increases, and I've experienced this too. When you are sleep deprived or you are highly stressed, the likelihood that you will experience these REM sleep paralysis events upon awakening is increased. And for me, it was happening when I was a young PhD student and I was studying sleep. And then I would be awake all night because I'd be monitoring the patients and looking at their sleep.
The irony of sleep studies.
Exactly, that you have to deprive yourself of the very thing that you are trying to study. Which, by the way, gives you some amazing insights for experiments that I've had as a consequence. Not that I would advise that as the way, and we'll come on to why that's not wise when we speak about creativity, but we were doing these studies, and then I would go home and then I would take a short period of sleep, maybe just 2.5 hours of sleep. And then I would wake up. I didn't want to because I was ready to go deep into sleep, but I would wake up and then I would force myself to be awake throughout the day and try to get to bed at a reasonable time. Because if I slept all day, what's going to happen? I'm just going to be awake all the next night and I'm going to be out of my rhythm. But what's interesting is that when I would wake up then, I would be waking up maybe at 10 a.m. in the morning, 11. And at that point, if you're sleeping there with someone like my phase, you are in a very REM sleep desiring state, that it's in those last morning hours and into the early morning hours when your brain wants to devour off the menu of sleep stages, this thing called REM, in vast quantities. So I was sleep deprived, point number one. Second, I was going into a very REM sleep rich phase, in other words, higher likelihood of paralysis. And that occurred to me. Your description is also prototypical. You've been drinking the night before, went out to the party. We spoke about in one of our previous episodes that one of the problems with alcohol is that it's very good at blocking your REM sleep. So you'd been absent of REM sleep the prior night. You'd built up what we call a REM sleep debt. And when you slept, all of a sudden what your brain wanted more, because it at least got some sleep, and there you're going to get mostly your deep sleep. The debt on the sheets of your balance account for sleep was not so great for deep non-REM, but you were very much in debt with REM. So what happened? As soon as you conked out on the couch, whoosh, you were probably straight into REM sleep. And then when you woke up, you had this mismatch in timing between consciousness and the release of paralysis. What did you experience? REM sleep paralysis.
Love it. I mean, hate it.
Yes.
I did not enjoy it, but I love your description. It's because it makes so very clear what happened. And for those that have had the experience, it can be mildly stressful to terrifying. So thank you for providing the therapy that is knowledge, and so that people don't stress it too much. But we still dissuade people from consuming alcohol prior to sleep.
Correct.